You're listening to Becoming Wildly Resilient, brought to you by University of Kentucky Human Resources, Health and Wellness. In this series, we'll explore a variety of well-being topics with experts from the university community in physical, emotional, nutritional, and financial health. Join us, and together we'll discover how we can thrive at work, home, and beyond. Welcome to a special episode of Becoming Wildly Resilient. If you're listening for the first time, I'm your host, Jakob Hester, and I'm glad you've discovered this podcast. I'm a wellness specialist with UK HR Health and Wellness, and for the last year, I've had different experts from around the University of Kentucky community join me each month to share their stories, acknowledge and define some of the common challenges we face, and discuss strategies and tools we can use to thrive at work, home, and beyond. We've covered a lot in the last year. So for this month's episode, I decided to recap the previous 12 episodes using clips from each guest. So for those of you listening for the first time, this will be a great starting point. If you've listened in the past, thanks for returning. This will also be a good refresher or opportunity to catch highlights from episodes you may have missed. Either way, I encourage you to go back and listen to the full episodes. Before I jump into the recaps though, I'd also love to hear from you. In the show notes will be a link to a short survey where you can help shape future episodes of this podcast. As a celebration of 1 year of the show and a token of our appreciation for your feedback, 10 UK employees, retirees, or spouses who fill out the survey will be chosen at random to win a copy of Adam Grant's book, Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. Responses to the survey are anonymous, but you'll have the option at the end of submitting your information for the drawing on a separate page that's unlinked with your feedback. Responses must be submitted by August 6th, 2021, and winners will be contacted by email the following week. And now, into the recaps we go. Joining me on the first episode was Jackie Carroll, a certified health coach with UK HR Health and Wellness. In this episode, titled Living Truthfully, Jackie and I talked about looking for opportunities in changing times rather than getting stuck glamorizing the past or wishing for the way things used to be. Here's how she explained that feeling during the height of the pandemic.
It's as though I had this reckoning about really the truth of what my life was before that. And the truth was that I have a choice, and we all had a choice. Are we going to make the best of the situation, or are we going to stay in the negative and the complaining and the wishing that it were something different than it is? And I just realized that there's no going back. It's a waste of energy wishing and dreaming that things were different than they are.
Jackie then had this to say about our capacity as humans and the possibilities before us.
As humans, we are so creative. We have the capacity to come up with brilliant ideas, brilliant solutions. And this is our time. Like you were saying, it's time to reinvent normal. And I love the idea of reinventing things because we're finding ways to get along in life in incredibly different ways we've never even thought of. And it should bring people so much joy and excitement and appreciation for how each individual has this immense creativity and spark to make all our lives better and to stick together knowing that we can create something amazing all together.
Later, we noted how automatically labeling circumstances as good or bad is a common trap we fall into. Here's how Jackie explained it.
Basically, everyday things that happen, circumstances arise, and we label them as good or bad. And actually, if we think back on our lives, on all the things that we thought were going to be terrible, we might look back and realize how much we've learned or grown from the experience, and it isn't as bad. So especially during this time, it seems so scary, so uncertain. Could we look at every moment, every day with a little less judgment about ourselves and others and the circumstances? Because we don't know that in a month from now, 3 months from now, a year or two from now, really, is it good or bad? Whatever it is. And that's one thing that has really helped me personally. And I hope that people can use that in their lives every day to lessen the grip and to give more freedom in the unknown.
After talking about how clarifying what we want and how we want to live can lead to creative solutions, Jackie had this to say on the importance of taking care of ourselves.
If we do not take care of ourselves, we don't have the energy to create something new. If we don't take care of ourselves, our immune system goes down, and that always correlates to getting sick at some point or another. So, taking care of ourselves, putting our health first, and I know I'm a health coach, so people might be rolling their eyes at me saying this, but it is so true, because at this moment, it doesn't matter what you can afford, what you can't afford, what your job is, what your responsibilities are. If you don't have your health, you don't have anything.
Finally, Jackie closed our conversation with this hope for you, the listener.
Being kind to yourself and others, staying open, and moving the way love moves, not the way fear moves.
On the second episode of the podcast, I was joined by Dr. Carrie Davidson, an exercise physiologist and MoveWell fitness manager with HR Health and Wellness. In Mindset to Move, we talked about how we could move more in ways that worked best for us individually. A key concept of this idea was training for life, which Carrie explained using a personal example.
So things change. So it's really about our mindset and how we approach our exercise. And so just because somebody sees it on YouTube or sees an infomercial doesn't mean it's right for them. And so really, I think what people have to dig deep and find out is, first of all, what is their goal? What are they trying to do? And so I always tell people, you want to train for your life. My life looks like I'm a mother of 3. I work full time. I want to be able to do my job, do it well. I want to be able to be a mom, to stay healthy, to take care of my kids. I teach yoga on a regular basis. I want to be able to teach yoga. I want to be able to help people improve their well-being. That is my goal. That is what I want to do. And so that's the reason I train the way I do.
Carrie goes on to explain why we need to be intentional with our movement throughout the day and provide some examples that have worked for her.
I think people forget that they have the power to choose. So, my job sometimes does require me to sit for long periods of time. And so I have found ways to move. I have a standing desk. I'll stand part of the time. I'll sit part of the time. If it's possible for me to walk around while I'm having a Zoom call or a phone call, I'll pop in some wireless earbuds and maybe walk while I'm having a meeting. We would have walking meetings. I find reasons to get up. It's a mindset. You have the power to choose. You need to look for ways to move. It's not built into our society like it used to be. We don't hunt and gather anymore the way that our bodies were designed to do. Our bodies were not designed to sit for long periods of time. They just weren't. Now here we are. We lay down in our bed for 6, 8 hours, however long we sleep. We get in our car for 20, 30 minutes to drive to campus. Then we sit at our desk for 8 hours a day. And then we get back in our car and we sit for 30 more minutes to drive back. And then we might even sit on the couch for the rest of the evening. We simply are not made for that.
Later, Carrie highlights how we can train for life more efficiently using functional compound movements.
So training for life, like I mentioned at the beginning, you want to do exercises or movements that mimic the things that you do every day so that when you do them every day, it's second nature and you're doing it efficiently and you're doing it properly and you're doing it safely. So and a lot of the exercises in the gym translate to that, but you don't necessarily have to be in a gym to do some of them. So think about a squat. We sit down 1,000,000 times a day. We sit down in our chair at our desk and we get up, and we sit down at the kitchen table and we get up, and we sit down in the car and we get up, and we sit down in the bathroom and we get up. That's a squat. So when you're doing things every day like that, that's going to be one of your main exercises that you want to do. And so that's a functional movement. It's going to help me to keep that function so I can get up and get down for as long as I live, as long as I keep on doing it. Exercise, no matter if it's strength training or flexibility or cardio, if we don't use it, we lose it. Our bodies detrain so quickly. We've got to stay up on it. The other thing that I want to say is, if time is of the essence for you, and it is for me, and it probably is for most people, then you want to do compound movements. So movements that cover more than one muscle group or more than one joint. So again, a squat would be a great example of a compound exercise, because when we squat down, we're working our quads, our hamstrings, our glutes, our core is strong. We're getting all sorts of muscle recruitment in that exercise. Whereas if you compare that to, say, a leg extension in the gym, that's a great exercise for your quads, and only for your quads. So that's not going to give me the most bang for my buck, so to speak. I'm not going to isolate a muscle group like that just to work that muscle group. I'm going to stick with something like a squat or a deadlift or a row, where I'm going to recruit way more muscles, where they're actually functional. I'm going to use those movements every single day in my life. And so that's going to be the number one tip that I give people to help them to get more, like you said, bang for their buck.
At the end of the episode, Carrie concludes with this advice.
Get up and move. That's my tagline. Get up and move. Whatever situation that you're in, look for the ways and look for the reasons and look for the potential for movement in your day.
The third episode was about caring for ourselves while caring for others. While this conversation was centered around parenting and elder care, both of my guests from Work Life shared some universal tips for managing stress and practicing self-care. First up was HR Work Life Manager Azetta Beatty, who had this to say about self-care.
Self-care is daily, all day long. It is not after work. It is not on the weekend. It is not when I get to take a vacation. Or it is not when I get to go get my hair cut, or when I get my nails done, or, some very, go to the spa, or those kinds of things. Those are nice things to do, obviously, for yourself for self-care. But if you think of self-care in those very compartmentalized moments of time, you will miss it. And also you will find yourself burning out, flaming out, and need a break. So we always encourage people to think of self-care as daily, all day long. So what does that mean? That may mean taking stretch breaks. That may mean eating in the morning when you get up. Or if you are a coffee drinker or a tea drinker, getting up and taking 5 or 10 minutes and just sit down and enjoy a cup of coffee or tea. Like literally give yourself permission to take that 10 or 15 minutes. Also, it may mean if we all need humor in our lives. So maybe one way you kind of give yourself a mental break is watch funny videos, call a friend and talk to them a little bit. So there's all kinds of things that we can do. And different people have different interests. Some people may like to read. So that's fine. Take a moment and take 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes and read a few chapters or a chapter of a book. If you feel like I'm not really that reader, but I don't mind audiobooks, we love audiobooks in my house. So, listen to the audiobook, go for a walk and listen to the audiobook. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can do. And again, people have different interests. So think about your own personal interests. Do you like to run? Do you like to walk? Do you like to color? Do you like puzzles? So self-care is so very important. So I highly recommend people think of that as a everyday, all day. What little things can I do throughout the day?
Terry Weber, a certified social worker and elder care specialist with HR Work Life, built upon this message and shared these tips for managing stress.
Here are some things that I've learned over the years, kind of some strategies. One way to manage stress is to be active. Get some exercise is a great way to manage your overall well-being. It helps release those endorphins in the brain, which energizes you and makes you feel good. A 10-minute walk can give you time to think, to vent to yourself, or to simply have nothing else to do but walk. You don't have to talk with anyone, you don't have to listen to anyone, and you don't have to help anyone. And another way I found to manage stress is to eat healthy. Although this is where mindfulness comes in. You need to be very mindful about what you eat, and so it's easy to forget about your own needs when you're caring for a loved one. But avoiding all that processed food and excess alcohol and trying to eat a healthy diet keeps your energy up and kind of gives you a better outlook on life. And sleep. We can't forget sleep. Poor sleep can affect your memory, your judgment, and your mood. And if you're continually being sleep deprived, it can have all sorts of negative consequences. And I know it's hard, but maintaining a healthy bedtime routine can really help in getting a better night's sleep. Another point I think is give yourself some grace. We all make mistakes, and things aren't always going to go the way we want. And when we're going through a particularly tough time, allow yourself some kindness. We're human. We can't do it all. Sometimes we wish our situation was different. And finally, I really think staying connected with family and friends is super important. Surrounding yourselves with people that you trust and respect and with whom you can share your frustrations and sadness with helps you feel connected. Again, it's not selfish, it's essential.
To close their episode, Azetta and Terry offered these bits of encouragement.
As far as one of the last points of encouragement, know yourself, pay attention to your internal signals, know what's going on with you, seek help if you need it, and make time for things that are going to enrich you and support you and encourage you and build you up, and just know that you can do it.
I think that self-care is not a luxury, it's a necessity. You need to take care of yourself when you care for someone else.
While the clips I shared from Azetta and Terry are universal, both of them also provide a wealth of information specifically related to parenting and elder care. So if you're fulfilling one of these roles at home or want to show up better for your coworkers that are, I highly recommend going back and listening to the full episode. And speaking of full episodes, the fourth episode is another multi-guest episode that I can only share short snippets from each guest. In Stories of Resilience, I speak with 5 UK employees and 1 spouse about their journeys. The following clips are words of advice they have to share, but be sure to go back and listen to their full stories. First was Ben Connor, an agriculture extension agent. This is what he had to share regarding his experience focusing on physical activity and exercise.
It all goes back to where you start. So definitely start with something that's obtainable and that you feel like you can achieve. Do not go in, by all means, go in 110%. But don't overexert yourself and commit all to changing every aspect of your life. So start with that one goal. That one goal may be far-fetched initially, and work towards that. And when you achieve that, your confidence continues to build, and you can add on from there. And so that would be my main advice. Don't feel like you have to change everything at once because this is not a sprint; it's a marathon. My goal and my motivator in life is I want to live a healthy life for the long term, so that way I can enjoy my life with my family. And so keep that end goal in mind as you make these steps towards a healthy life.
Scott and Laura Mason joined me next to share their story about quitting tobacco. Scott, a data technician with UK Information Technology Services, offered the following advice on persevering and asking for help.
I would say 2 things. The first thing is don't ever give up. Like I say, I've been trying to do this for a really long time, and I feel like I've had more success with it now than I ever have previously. And if I had simply continued to ignore those emails or just said, I can't do it, I'm too old, whatever excuse I came up with, if I'd given up, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. So number 1 is don't give up. And number 2 is don't be afraid to reach out and ask somebody for help. A lot of times I think people feel like they're all alone, and you're only as alone as you make yourself be. I stopped being alone the minute I said, hey, can you help me with this? And then there was Jackie and everybody to get me what I needed.
Up next was Megan Piper, a charge nurse with UK Healthcare. Based on her experience, she had this to say about taking the first step toward a change.
The hardest and most difficult step in any kind of change is the first one. It's just that first step where, you're fighting all the things inside that say, ooh, this is scary, or this is risky, or what if they don't accept me, or what if they don't, what if they judge me or whatever? I think my biggest advice for anyone who feels like they're in a situation that's similar to mine, or maybe not even similar to mine, but you feel stuck or you feel like something's missing, just take a chance, just take a chance, take that first step. The only thing you've really lost if it doesn't pan out is an hour, of your time. And we waste hours of time every single day. So, that's 1 hour you didn't spend on Facebook scrolling. You know what I mean? I think you will be pleasantly surprised by whatever you go looking for if you ask for help from any of the people who work for UK Health and Wellness.
Sarah Gullett was my fourth interview in the Stories of Resilience episode, and she talked about the support she received from management and radiation medicine services. Here she explains work-life balance as a working parent.
I would say to other parents that if you're looking for that support and you're kind of worried about how is UK going to think of me, they're going to think possibly that I'm not as strong of an employee as, say, someone who doesn't have children. I would just say, don't be scared to come to your management team and let them know what's going on, because UK doesn't look at people as being weak because of their circumstances. There is something that UK offers. It's a well-being day. I will say that I use those days for my mental well-being. Sometimes I do need some time for myself, so I will take the day just to mentally unwind and de-stress and do something that I wanted to do, because I don't get to do that very often with 3 little ones, and I'm a single parent. I'm a little outnumbered. So
My final guest on the Stories of Resilience episode was Dr. Leanne Walmsley from the College of Nursing. She shared this thought on the intersection of practicing gratitude, expressing vulnerability, and developing deeper connection.
But I work very hard when I have those bumps to be self-reflectful, to be grateful for my health, grateful for my family, grateful for my friends, grateful for my faith, grateful for my students, grateful for my faculty and my colleagues, the staff that I work with. I take it one step further and say, why? Why am I grateful for those things? Well, I'm grateful for those things because it makes us who we are. It makes the world who we all are together. And we are all in this together. All of us experience the same commonalities, the same common things. It just takes a really humble, strong sense of resilience to go ahead with other people and admit it and say, yeah, I didn't do that great. I'm sorry. I screwed up. Will you forgive me? And I think if we would all be a little more honest with our own failings and a little more honest with how we struggle from day to day in all aspects of our life, and just realize that everybody's doing the best they can, and give each other some love and compassion and unconditional regard for each other.
Moving into the fifth episode, I was joined by Dr. Karen Bryla McNeese, a registered dietitian with UK HR Health and Wellness. We talked about common challenges related to nutrition, especially emotional eating and self-indulgent behaviors. We also discussed the power of self-compassion and giving ourselves grace. Here's Karen describing one of the most notable signs of emotional eating and self-indulgence.
But I think that one of the biggest tells of either emotional eating or self-indulgence is how you feel afterwards. If you feel pangs of guilt or shame after eating, that is probably a signal that you did not honor your body's true needs. And as much as I talk about guilt and shame, they are actually very useful emotions that can serve as clues for us as we work to learn about ourselves and make better choices.
In response to these feelings, Karen offers up self-compassion as an alternative practice.
So this is where, right, we're really getting to the heart of things here, and where people can really start to see how they can put something into practice to help them with this self-indulgence. So self-compassion means being gentle, kind, and understanding with yourself. It means accepting that you are not perfect. And it means understanding that there is potential to learn and grow from every mistake that you make.
She goes on to explain the following tips for practicing self-compassion.
There's a couple tips I might recommend to our listeners who want to practice more self-compassion. One is to talk to yourself like you would a close friend or family member. Sometimes a simple phrase is all that you really need to substitute that self-talk with something more compassionate. So one example might be, "This is hard, but I will keep working to honor my true needs." So you can actually Google self-compassion mantras and find some that maybe speak to you and kind of keep them in your back pocket for those moments when you need to flip that negative self-talk around. Another important tip that I want to mention is allowing what you think or feel to have its moment. We tend to have one of two responses to negative emotions. One is to stuff them down and ignore them. And unfortunately, I think our culture perpetuates this. We're supposed to put on that brave face and not show our vulnerability. But at the end of the day, not dealing with negative emotions is a choice in and of itself. You are dealing with it, but in a maladaptive way. The other response to negative emotions is quite the opposite, where people tend to ruminate in those emotions and exaggerate their impact and importance. Personally, I like to call it wallowing. But finding a balance between these two responses is the goal. You want to practice sitting with and acknowledging negative emotions. You want to trust that they are not going to overwhelm you. They are just emotions, okay? And you want to look at them objectively as information, like we talked about earlier, right? These emotions, again, as uncomfortable as they may be, are telling you something. And if your response is balanced, where those emotions can have a moment, you can use those emotions to find insights and get a deeper understanding of your true needs.
Karen concludes with these thoughts.
I want our listeners to know that they are not alone in whatever they are experiencing. Your worth is not defined by your size, what you eat, or how you cope with adversity. Okay. And if you want to find some freedom from any guilt or shame that you do feel around food, I hope that you will practice some of the tips that we discussed today, or reach out to us at Eat Well for some more help.
Joining me for the 6th episode of Becoming Wildly Resilient was licensed clinical social worker Cindy Bowling. Cindy is a mental health therapist with UK HR Work Life, and our episode covered the progression from stress to burnout. Feelings of burnout rose nationwide throughout the pandemic, and our population was not immune to it. Here's Cindy explaining the differences between stress and burnout.
So I think about stress as kind of our body's experience of challenges that we face, whether it be at work, whether it be at home, just living in the world. So it's an emotional or physical tension in our body in response to things that are happening. And I think we need to pull out like stress that we experience versus stressors, things that cause stress in our lives. Like those are different things. And when I think about burnout, I think that is defined more around like emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion that's caused by prolonged or chronic stress. So I think those for me are the differences in those two things.
She goes on to describe some signs of burnout that we can use to recognize its manifestation in ourselves or others.
So I think that it begins kind of with being done, like just really struggling, whether it's at work, showing up at work. If you're thinking about somebody who typically was positive, able to come in, do all the things, like if you notice, like they're just getting things squeaking in under the timeline, and then maybe they start to be late or things like that, or just a general, like, really not feeling good about the work, really not feeling good about the role that they may play with colleagues or with their family or with friends. So I think those can be some really early signs that we may miss and just kind of blow off as a stress response, or, something's going on. So there's an end to it and we're just going to let them do them and just move on, things like that. So I think those could be some signs from other people. I think that in the early stages, it's not necessarily a constant state. It does ebb and flow, but I think the more we move down into chronic stress or to a place of really feeling like, is there hope? Does it matter what I do? Am I affecting any change or any good in this life at all? Those kind of things. That's when it gets to kind of a problematic and crisis point.
Once we've recognized some early signs of burnout, Cindy offers these strategies for reversing that process.
So I think to slow that process down is to recognize what stressors are popping up in your life and how are you managing them. Are you taking care of yourself? Are you talking through the stressors? Are you able to problem solve around, is this something that's in my control? And if so, let me think about what I can do about it to kind of shift things or make things better for me. So to stay curious about what you can do and have an outlet, whether it's, physical exercise or connecting with people or talking to people, friends, family, professional, whatever that looks like, to be able to move through, like, understanding the feelings that you're having and not just ignoring them and stuffing them down.
Finally, Cindy provides this validation for some of the common feelings experienced during the pandemic.
We are living through a collective trauma, and if you are not okay, like, nobody is okay. And it's okay to say that. And I think to validate that for people, that if you're exhausted, if you're anxious, if you're worn out, you're not alone. And with UK employees, like, that we can do to help just support that. We don't have to fix it. But we can validate and support it. And so I'm hopeful that people will reach out for those things and know that there's no shame, because we're all in it. We're all in this together.
Building on my episode with Cindy was a conversation with Amy Rodquist Cadet, who is a national board certified health and wellness coach with HR Health and Wellness. This is another dense episode and pairs well with the previous one. I highly recommend listening to episodes 6 and 7 fully, as they set a foundation for future episodes. In this episode with Amy, we dive into feelings and how we can use that information to identify and address underlying needs. Here's Amy explaining the importance of naming and accepting our feelings.
I think paying attention to feelings and what is happening, like, in the body and the brain, is one of the most powerful ways we can take care of ourselves, that we can bounce back from emotional pain, physical pain. It is, I think, a core element of resilience. And like you said, it is counterintuitive because we want to avoid it, but the very things that we attempt to do to avoid it, to numb out, to disassociate from the pain, is actually causing that pain, emotionally or physically, to kind of bounce back louder, almost like it grabs a megaphone and turns up the volume.
Amy then explains how we can move from naming our feelings to identifying and meeting our needs.
Being able to get a little bit deeper into what it is that you're exactly feeling. That's usually the first step. And how looking at a feelings list can really help us do that. Kind of massage out, like, oh, it's really this versus this. So once you kind of can name the feeling, then what I find is really helpful is to drop down one step deeper, which is around needs. Because as Dr. Marsha Rosenberg suggests, is that, that negative feeling is the first step, and then below that feeling is a need that we have, a universal need that every person on the planet, we all have these basic universal needs, and we're all just walking around trying to get our needs met. And so when we can figure out, based on the difficult feeling, what need isn't getting met, then we have a really, really important kind of realization that happens, that we can notice like, okay, I'm really feeling a need for autonomy or for freedom or for harmony or whatever the need is. And then we can actually begin to meet our need instead of trying to numb out or use a strategy that really isn't very helpful in meeting our need.
One of the keys to this process Amy describes is to get curious.
Just allowing those difficult emotions to show up, to recognize it, and to realize, I wonder, get curious, right? Like, I wonder what this difficult feeling is here to tell me. And when we get curious about that, then it doesn't feel so threatening, so overwhelming, or even so shaming.
Amy then breaks down the process into 3 easy to remember steps using A, B, C.
So A is just to acknowledge the difficult feeling, to name it. So looking at your feelings list, feeling what you feel, calling it out, labeling it, and then giving yourself an invitation to just take a few deep breaths, right? Because we know that the breath is a powerful way to reset our parasympathetic nervous system and bring about our natural calm response. So that's the B, is the breath. And then the C is to choose, to figure out like, okay, if you're feeling a sense of exhaustion, like, what is the next smallest choice that you can make, the most simple, doable action that you can do in the next moment to meet your need? Because sometimes in the moment, you can't do this big sweeping gesture, right? You can't just go out and get a massage or take a trip, right? So thinking about what's the next smallest thing you can do in the moment to care for yourself, to meet your need, and to really grow an abundance of tools for yourself. So I even have on my phone, I've got a list in the notes section of little things that take me less than 5 minutes of ways that I can care for myself. So sometimes that just means a walk to the mailbox, giving myself some tea, washing my hands with a really delicious smelling soap and putting some lotion on, calling my best friend. There's a variety of things. These aren't going to change the trajectory of your life, but these small little compassionate kindnesses that we can offer ourselves help us to reset and move on to the next thing that we need to do.
She then goes on to detail how to meet our needs over the long run.
Really identifying the core needs that keep coming up for you, the needs that you notice again and again aren't regularly being met for you, and then coming up with strategies, tangible ways to care for yourself and to meet that need. It's so personalized, but think for yourself, what is one small thing you can do daily to meet your need? What's another bigger thing you can do weekly to meet your need? And write it down, because it's hard to think of them in the moment. But this can be a really, really powerful thing to prioritize your needs so that you don't find yourself running on empty and numbing out or finding strategies that don't actually work.
And here's the final thought Amy leaves for listeners at the end of our conversation on our episode From Feelings to Needs.
I would say that our feelings are not random, that they tell us about our core needs and desires, that our feelings carry wisdom and messages for us, so that when we can see them as messengers and offer them a seat at the table, we are less overwhelmed, we're less threatened, and we can get curious about what those messages, even on the most difficult feelings, what do they want to tell us? And I think it can totally be transformative, paying attention to our feelings and not just stuffing them in and hoping that they're going to go away, because they're not. They're here because they want to help us use them and transform.
Next, we jump back into the nutrition world with Vanessa Oliver, a registered dietitian with HR Health and Wellness. In the 8th episode, we talk about eating your veggies and loving yourself. Recently, Vanessa and Karen, who you heard from earlier, became certified intuitive eating counselors. Here's Vanessa explaining what intuitive eating is and how they use it.
Intuitive eating is a self-care eating framework. Its aim is to help people make peace with food. And what that means is creating a healthy relationship between eating and your mind and your body. So essentially, it's a practice of responding to your internal bodily cues for hunger and fullness instead of other external factors. It doesn't mean that you eat perfectly, whatever that means, all the time, but it does mean that your relationship with food takes up less emotional and mental energy. There's a lot of confusion and shame and anxiety around food in the world, and what we try to do is provide kind of a safe place for members to explore new information and ways of thinking. And intuitive eating is a really great framework for us to do that.
When asked how nutrition and resilience are linked, Vanessa had this to say.
Research actually supports that we're going to be more successful and have more motivation in the long run if we're kinder to ourselves. And so I think listeners could consider practicing maybe a little bit more self-compassion, a little bit more kindness, some positive self-talk. If you're feeling like a failure or inadequate in some way, not eating perfectly, quote unquote. And that's where, nutrition and resilience are really connected. It's a practice. No one does anything correctly the first time. You keep practicing, and you go along that continuum. Sometimes you're going to be going forward and sometimes you're going to be going backward. And all of that is a completely human response.
Vanessa then ties back to the previous conversation on feelings. Here she explains how practicing mindfulness can enhance both your nutritional habits and resilience.
Sort of greeting that adversity that might come up, not suppressing any sort of negative emotion that might be associated with maybe not changing as fast as you want to, for example, because, the struggle is definitely real and human, like I said. Lots of times if you look at, say, nutrition influencers on social media, for example, they might make it seem like there's this one true way to eat correctly, and that's just not true. So that would be one thing to do, just sort of pay attention to what's coming from within instead of relying on those external factors. And also trying to be less rigid and trying not to get sucked into that need for needing a drill sergeant or following those rules. Diet culture has a lot of rules about what and when and why and how to eat. So I think that inviting yourself to sort of tune into and recognize and listen to your cues of hunger or cues of fullness are such an important part of nourishing your body. And nourishment is such a chief aspect of self-care. I mean, it's like, is it the bottom part of the hierarchy of needs? So, and we know that practicing self-care is such a necessary, like you said, piece of resiliency. So those are some things that listeners can consider when they're looking to be more mindful, and also just creating an environment where it's pleasant to cook or prepare food or to eat it. Really paying attention to sights and smells and sounds and textures and tastes of your food. A lot of times we don't do that. We eat in a very distracted way. So practicing a little bit more mindfulness in that capacity can also be helpful.
Our conversation then heads into a discussion on eating local and community-supported agriculture. A common challenge or barrier for people is around incorporating new foods. These are the tips that Vanessa offered.
The first thing is not to expect a miracle like right away. You got to give yourself some time to kind of adjust. And again, increasing your positive self-talk when it comes to trying new foods can be really helpful there. But certainly some good strategies would be to mix what you already like with something new. Or maybe you don't like green bell peppers, so you've sworn off all peppers, but it turns out you really like orange ones. So giving yourself a little bit of that sort of exploration kind of mindset can be really important. Also, not forcing yourself to love something. I just talked about trying new foods, and I think it is important to try with an open mind, but know that there's not this one particular food that you have to eat absolutely in order to be healthy. So definitely try something with an open mind, but keep in mind you're not going to like everything, and that's perfectly fine. And then also, I think with incorporating new foods, we've already talked about this, but creating that more mindful dining experience. But all of those sort of sensory aspects can also help with incorporating new foods because you're creating an experience. Those are some strategies that I usually tend to suggest to people who are struggling a little bit.
In the final clip of this episode with Vanessa, she delivers this take-home message.
Eat your vegetables. Love yourself. And don't be afraid that you're doing it wrong. There's always going to be a learning curve for everything. But yeah, just keeping that sort of open mind and that experimenting mindset is going to go a long way.
As a music nerd, episode 9 was an especially fun conversation for me. HR work-life therapist Eric Wilkinson joined me to talk about some of the benefits of music. Here's Eric describing why music is so deeply connected to our feelings and emotions.
What's really fascinating about music is it's one of those things where when we're listening to music, there is direct neural firing in our brain so that our brain is syncing up with the music. When you think about music and about what it means to be human, there's no known human culture or society across time where music was not present. And so it's extremely universal. It's also believed that music likely existed before language. And so we know that to your question of, how does it connect to feeling and emotion? When we listen to music, it activates all regions of our brain, but it in particular activates emotional regions of our brain in a way that exists outside of language.
In addition to what happens on a neurological level, music is also inextricably linked to our experience as humans.
If you think about the most important events for most humans, as well as times when we're experiencing emotional difficulty, music is almost always present or is accessed to help us to enhance the experience, to contextualize the experience, to help us move through the experience. And so I think that music is I'm biased. I wouldn't be on this podcast talking about this subject if I wasn't extremely biased towards music. But I feel like music is the most therapeutic intervention that is available to us.
We can also step outside of ourselves while listening to music. It provides us an opportunity to consider the experiences and emotions of others, as Eric explains here.
Music can enhance empathy and compassion. It really can let us not only feel what somebody else is feeling, but want to feel motivated to alleviate suffering from others. And so the capacity to connect with people whose experiences are different than yours is one of the amazing aspects of music. And when we start to think about higher ideals of social justice or ideals of compassion or love or peace, again, it can be powerful in terms of letting us understand in a really primal way what other people are experiencing.
Beyond listening to calming music to reduce stress, Eric also shares how music can be a long-term tool for increasing resilience.
When we really engage with the full range of emotion that music can evoke, it's a safe way for us to experiment with feeling different things. And the more practice we have feeling a range of emotion, intensity and emotion, the more practice we have with emotion, the more that we are able to hold difficult emotion when it arises. And so I really look at music as not only a resource to us when we're going through a difficult time, something that we can do to feel better, but I actually look at it as a way of building resilience, of learning to connect with a wide range of emotion, to hold emotion. And so that when an emotion arises within us that might feel threatening or foreign, that we can say, that we know intuitively that I can experience this, I can be present with it, I can engage with it, and I can let this emotion resolve or transform or move through me. And that's one of the functions of music is taking difficult emotion and transforming it into something else.
In his final thoughts, Eric had this to say.
Well, I don't think there's a wrong way to do music. I think that I would strongly encourage engagement with music and curiosity about different types of music, as well as your own willingness to play music or sing songs.
And if you've listened to this episode or any after it, you will know that Eric and I created a resilience playlist that we shared as part of our episode. On the remaining episodes, I asked each guest what song or two they'd add to it. I've since returned to my previous guests and asked for their input as well. I've added their songs to the playlist along with some listener submissions, so this is an open invitation for you to contribute. If you have a song you'd like to add, email us at healthandwellness@uky.edu, and I'll likely add it on there. You can find the link to the playlist in the show notes or search for A Wildly Resilient Playlist on Spotify. On the next episode, Dr. Nicole Huff, an associate professor of family finance and resource management, joined me to discuss financial well-being and the idea of investing in yourself. We start off by talking about financial literacy.
Well, financial literacy is at its heart having the foundational knowledge, skills, and habits that promote lifelong financial health. And so it is not a one and done. And that's really what financial health and well-being is. It's that practice of strong and sustainable financial principles, things like spending wisely and developing a budget and avoiding debt and saving for the future. But those habits and principles that contribute to financial health.
So how does financial well-being interact with the other dimensions of our well-being? Nicole explains the reciprocal relationship here.
Research would most definitely support that there is a reciprocal interaction and affect between our financial health and our mental health. Because when our mental health struggles, our financial health struggles, and vice versa. And so I think to overlook such an intimate and integral part of our livelihood would be to leave a dimension off of our overall well-being. And so, you really have to consider the whole person and what makes up their livelihood so that you can focus on whole health.
She goes on to provide an example of this relationship.
Managing financial issues, it takes a lot of mental effort. And so when we're financially stressed, it really limits our ability to think about other things. And so research shows that when our mental health is low, we tend to spend more. And that's because that discipline that I mentioned, that kind of goes out the window.
When asked how financial resilience mirrored our overall resilience, Nicole had this to say.
What really matters with resiliency is what you do moving forward. And so whether it was in your control or out of your control, what do you do moving forward? And so in terms of financial resiliency, to bounce back from those challenging financial situations, we really need to better understand how to manage our finances and resources. So we have to equip ourselves with those tools and those habits and those disciplines and that skill set, because finances can be confusing.
Next, she breaks down some of the foundational skills for financial resilience.
The first thing in developing that skill set, that financial skill set, is getting control of your monthly budget. And, compare your sources of income to your expenses and begin to track those, because we won't our income to exceed our expenses. And that's when it creates opportunities to save or invest or pay down debt or to splurge, because we want to do fun things like home renovations or take vacations. Because the flip side of that, when our expenses exceed our income, we generate debt. And that's what we want to avoid. And so that's when we have to look for ways to cut spending where we can, with those spending leaks, those small purchases that can add up quickly. And then look for other ways to maximize your resources and pay off outstanding debts. And then building that emergency fund if you haven't already. So those are the 3 steps that I recommend. Assess your current financial situation, figure out where your money is going, adjust accordingly, pay down debt, and begin to save.
Throughout the episode, Nicole provides additional habits to consider implementing and tools to explore. Like the other episodes, I encourage you to listen to the full episode, but Nicole leaves listeners with this final thought.
So I would just like to say, I would encourage you to seek opportunities to grow and to expand your knowledge of finances, and to know that financial literacy and financial health, they aren't end destinations. So it's more of lifelong practices that strengthen with effort and time and intentionality, which is my word for 2021. So it pays to invest in your financial future.
In May 2021, HR Health and Wellness and Work Life hosted our annual Employee Wellbeing Week, which was around the idea of moving forward with our well-being, both individually and collectively. I was joined by HR Work-Life therapist Ann Bassoni and Rhonda Henry for this special episode. We began our conversation about some of the common mental health challenges people faced at various points throughout the pandemic. However, Rhonda also found that individuals were able to recognize some positives, which brought up the idea of holding 2 contrasting emotions simultaneously. Here's Rhonda.
One thing that I've heard a lot is, and I've been proud of so many folks that I've come across who have wanted to really keep themselves grounded in that gratitude. I mean, I've heard from so many people, they'll start a session even with like, well, I shouldn't complain. I've got a job, or I'm not sick, or, I've got somebody that I'm happy and safe with at my home, but I'm still having a hard time. And I think I think it's just really important for us to give ourselves grace to hold both of those at the same time. We can be absolutely grateful. We can look for those bright side moments or those things that are working well. Or, I've heard folks that, love getting to spend more time with their kids, or love having the whole family together, under one roof if they are. But they still may be having a hard time with some parts of this, and it doesn't take away our gratitude, or it doesn't mean that we don't see or appreciate those things if we also acknowledge that, yeah, but I'm having a hard time with this piece of it.
The vulnerability and uncertainty brought on by the pandemic also presented opportunities to learn, as Rhonda explained here.
Because we didn't have a choice in being vulnerable, there's always something we can learn from it. Whether it went well or whether it didn't, we can learn more about ourselves. We can learn more about what our relationships need to be, what our boundaries need to be. There's learning opportunities in all of this. It's just, I think, balancing that with other types of self-care. How do we pace ourselves so that we don't get overwhelmed?
Anne also found that this time gave many people a chance to slow down, and there was a lesson in there for being more mindful going forward.
I truly believe that we were most people were moving at 1,000 miles per hour. And I think we did a lot of just living by the seat of our pants. And this forcing us to slow down, while it's been maddening at times, it also allows you that time to consider different possibilities or different connections and things like that. And I had someone this week who was talking about her kids, and sports are opening back up. And she said, I don't know that I want them to play 3 sports anymore, because we've really enjoyed having dinner every night together, or we really enjoyed not having to rush around after school, and I got to see my kids for an hour basically before they went to bed. So I think if you can be mindful of, boy, this moment feels good, and why does it feel good, and how do I repeat it moving forward, is how you combine those things.
As we looked forward to what life might look like as things continue to open up and many people return to campus, here's what Anne and Rhonda suggested we focus on. First Anne, then Rhonda.
I think now is the time to really start thinking about what were the parts that worked for you that you want to bring forward? I think that's on a personal level. I think it's on, a macro level, is how did these things work? And let's be figuring out what we want to bring forward.
Coming back in some way, whatever that looks like, whether it's physically or go into some sort of hybrid schedule, it doesn't carry the same experience for everybody. Again, I think that's just where that vulnerability, those conversations, being able to allow some grace and space for that, just can let us stay connected and find ways to support each other, and not kind of diminish anybody's experience of what's going on today.
Our conversation then turned to self-care, where Rhonda offered this advice for getting started with a self-care plan.
But I think a big part of it is just starting, trying something. Just what Ian said, a lot of times when I'm working with clients who are feeling really overwhelmed or they aren't sure where to start, I'll really encourage them to kind of identify a basic 3. What are 3 things they want to weave in some way? And that might be, simple, low-hanging fruit. And then you can build on that, again, using help from places like our office or health and wellness folks. We're here for those reasons. And that's part of what I love working with people on, is how do we take it from this big, overwhelming, not sure what to do? Let's get it down to something that feels manageable and can fit on a Post-it note. That's often what I'll tell clients. Your self-care plan starts on a Post-it note, because anything bigger than that is more than what you've got energy for right now.
To cap off the humor and advice Anna and Rhonda shared throughout the episode, they left these final bits of encouragement for you, the listener.
I guess it's my sign off with clients right now. I just say, keep shining, because we all shine a little.
I like that. I think for me, it's possible to feel different. If you don't like how you feel, it's possible to feel different, and we can help.
And for the final recap in this episode, Ryan Mason, an exercise physiologist with HR Health and Wellness, joined me to talk about stepping it up, literally. We spent the first half of our time talking about some physical activity research he has worked on over the past few years and what we can learn from that information before we later dove into goal setting. Here's Ryan explaining the first study.
Yeah, so the first study that we did with the data from our programs was specifically to determine if our incentivized step challenges were having a lasting effect on our populations.
And this is what they found from that first study.
What we found were people at baseline, meaning before the challenge, who were not getting a lot of steps, were very likely to increase the amount of steps they were getting during the challenge. And they were also likely to maintain that higher step count after the challenge. So we determined this by looking at the week before the challenge and the week after the challenge. And that was a really exciting piece of information for us to learn about our physical activity challenges that we were setting up.
The second study looked at the effects of the pandemic on physical activity, as Ryan describes here.
The current project that we're working on, we're looking at how COVID affected behavior of our participants. So we're looking at it from a general standpoint, meaning during 2020 compared to 2019 during the same time frames. And we're also interested from a policy standpoint. So how did implementation of various policies such as healthy at home affect the behavior of our participants?
Because we expected a change in physical activity, I asked Ryan what he found to be the most surprising results of the second study. He had this to say.
To me, the most surprising thing that we found was there's a significant decrease in steps per day, but not in exercise minutes.
So what does that actually mean, and what might be the reason for that? Here's Ryan again to explain.
From practical terms, that means that we're not getting as much ambient movement throughout the day. So people were likely still thinking about their exercise regimen. They were thinking about the fact that they're not going to gyms because they're all closed, that sort of thing, and going out and doing something. But all of those other hours of the day, whenever they're at home working, sitting at a desk, that sort of thing, we were just not moving around as much as we would have been had we been back on campus still.
I was also curious then what we could learn from this information and how it translates into our daily habits. This is what Ryan suggested.
Yeah, so I think one of the important things that we've learned is we emphasize exercise all the time in our field, but we haven't been emphasizing just moving more. And with our blog, we've realized this, and we're taking the approach now, trying to get people just to move more. But I think one of the things people can do is use their devices to set up an alert. Make sure that you are moving throughout the day, rather than trying to get everything in, at the end of the workday. You can do something as simple as setting up your Fitbit or your Apple Watch to help you get 1,000 steps every hour. So the frequency at which you get up and move will help you get more physical activity throughout the workday.
Our conversation then spun into using the SMART acronym for goal setting. I think that portion of the conversation is best left in its entirety. So if you're looking for a way to set better, more defined goals, you can check out the time frame from 3356 to 4152 of that episode. From there, Ryan shared advice and tips he commonly gives during exercise consults for those getting started with a new physical activity or exercise goal.
Whenever I have a consult with people, there are some really important things that I talk about. One is I make sure people know that they don't have to get to the minimum recommendations immediately. I always tell people, right now, you're not exercising. If after this meeting, you're working out 1 day a week for 10 minutes, it's a win, right? We've increased how much physical activity you're getting. And for most people, I think it puts them a little bit at ease to know that, hey, I'm not expecting to get to 150 minutes of exercise when I leave this meeting today. I'm just getting to something that is obtainable for me. And the other thing is, I want to make sure that their program is as enjoyable as possible for them. So I always ask people, is there anything in the past that you've really liked or really didn't like? Because I need to make sure that I either include that thing or exclude the thing that you didn't like.
And to conclude our conversation, this was Ryan's take-home message.
My number one takeaway from this episode would be just to move more. We want to make sure that we are not sitting in one spot. We're not getting all of those sedentary minutes throughout the day. We are getting out, we're exploring, we're doing stuff, we're using our bodies, and in general, that's going to make us more healthy.
To quote Porky Pig, that's all, folks. At least for this episode of Highlights. I'll be back next month with another new guest and episode. As I mentioned throughout the episode, though, I highly encourage you to explore the individual episodes fully because they contain even more useful information than I can include in just over an hour. I want to thank all my guests from the past year again for coming on the show and sharing their knowledge and expertise. And I especially want to thank you for listening. Again, you have a chance to shape the future of this show by providing feedback on a short survey, so I'd love to hear from you. You can find the link to that survey in the show notes, and it will be open through Friday, August 6th, 2021. Finally, I'll include a link in the show notes to all upcoming programming offered by UK HR Health and Wellness and Work Life, so be sure to check out what's coming up soon. Until next time, take care of yourself and others, and be well. Thanks for listening to Becoming Wildly Resilient, a podcast series from University of Kentucky Human Resources, Health and Wellness. The UK HR Health and Wellness team, consisting of certified health coaches, fitness experts, registered dietitians, and wellness specialists, offer a wide range of online and in-person programming to University of Kentucky employees, retirees, and their spouses. If you enjoyed this episode, you can listen and subscribe to future episodes wherever you find your podcasts. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram by searching @UKY Wellness. There, you'll find links to episode show notes and more. You can also email healthandwellness@uky.edu with any questions or suggestions for future episode topics. To learn more about well-being benefits offered by University of Kentucky Human Resources, visit www.uky.edu/HR/wellbeing. Live well.